everybody, I'm Greg Mankiw, and I'm here today to talk to you about teaching intermediate macroeconomics. Over the span of my career, I've taught intermediate macroeconomics to Harvard students about 15 times. And as some of you may know, I've written an intermediate macroeconomics textbook. It's now in its 10th edition, and I'm putting to bed the 11th edition right now. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you about several guidelines that I'd recommend to someone teaching intermediate macroeconomics. Like all advice, pedagogical advice should be taken with a grain of salt. I'll try to explain my reasoning behind my guidelines, but as the old adage goes, your mileage may vary. Guideline number 1, suppress your idiosyncrasies. When teaching a required course for majors, whether it's an introductory course or an intermediate course, the professor should embrace the role of ambassador for the economics profession. The students are not there to learn your particular idiosyncratic views of the world. They're there to learn the foundational ideas that economists have broadly established and accepted as the consensus view. As a result, if your views differ substantially from the consensus view, your obligation is to suppress your idiosyncrasies. For example, you may passionately believe that the business cycle is driven by exogenous shocks to technology, that monetary policy has no real effects, and that economic fluctuations are a Pareto-optimal response to these exogenous forces. If so, you should probably keep that opinion to yourself, at least for most of the course. Most of your colleagues in the economics profession have a very different view about what drives the business cycle. And your students are better off learning the consensus view than your idiosyncratic perspective. My sense is that most teachers of intermediate macroeconomics follow this advice. The best-selling text for the course, mine plus my nearest competitors, all present a synthesis view that includes a classical long run and a Keynesian short run. To be sure, each book takes the student on a somewhat different pedagogical journey, but they end up in a common destination. Students leave the course understanding the consensus among macroeconomists. Guideline number 2, reinforce basic principles. Many intermediate students have, before this course, taken only introductory economics. Do not assume that they fully understood the key lessons from that course. Or maybe they did understand them and they still remember them. Economics is a hard subject for many people, and they need to hear the basic principles several times before they fully internalize them. As you review the basic principles, you can cover the material more quickly because, after all, it is a review. But the review is crucial to jog students' memories before moving on to more advanced material. For example, in chapter 1 of my intermediate macro book, I include a review of the basic model of supply and demand. Ostensibly, it's there to illustrate the concept of model building and to define the notions of exogenous and endogenous variables. But there is, however, a hidden agenda. And the hidden agenda is to remind students about how this important model of supply and demand works, because it's going to provide the foundation for many things that follow. Guideline number 3, revel in the act of model building. One big difference between the introductory course and the intermediate course is that students in intermediate courses are presumptively majors in economics or something similar, like maybe business. At the intermediate level, instructors don't need to be concerned about the math-averse English major who's taking the course as an elective or to fulfill a distribution requirement. As a result, the use of mathematics can be a lot greater than at the introductory level. Intermediate courses are an opportunity to expand students' appreciation for the use of mathematical models to understand and communicate economic concepts. One intermediate level model that I particularly enjoy teaching is the solo growth model. It's an elegant model showing how saving, population growth, and technological progress interact, leading to a steady state with balanced growth. The math is straightforward, but the diagrams are novel. They haven't seen it before, most likely, and the results are surprising, or at least they are before you've seen them. I usually teach the solo model early in the course because it provides an important benchmark. It explains the long-run growth path around which short-run fluctuations occur. In other words, the fluctuations described by, say, the ISLM model or the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model are occurring superimposed on top of the long-run growth described by the Solow model. Let's face it, economists enjoy playing with models, much like children enjoy playing with their models of cars, boats, and planes. That may be a nerdy thing to admit, but that's okay. The intermediate course is where we can begin to nerd out without apology. And some students can come to learn the fun of nerding out as well. Guideline number 4, admit our model's limitations. Just as students in the intermediate course can develop a more sophisticated appreciation of model building, they can also develop a greater understanding of models' limitations. They can start to see that models are simplifications, and that the art in economics is in determining when a simplification clarifies important ideas and when it obscures the key forces at work. Growth theory is again a good example. The Solow model shows that once an economy reaches a steady state, the growth in income per person is driven entirely by the rate of technological progress. But the model takes technological progress as exogenous, like the old joke, it assumes a can opener. To really understand the advances in living standards from generation to generation, we need other models to explain technological progress. Hence, after students have learned to appreciate the elegance of the Solow model, they quickly understand the need for endogenous growth theory. And I present some basic models of endogenous growth soon after presenting the Solow model. Discussing economic growth also encourages students to appreciate the important factors that are hard to model. When you talk to economic historians, one thing you learn is how important institutions and culture are to explain why some nations are more prosperous than others. But institutions and culture are not readily amenable to conventional economic modeling. By acknowledging this fact, instructors can help students appreciate that other social sciences, political science, sociology, may be important for explaining some phenomena central to economics, like long-run economic growth. When teaching intermediate macroeconomics, I emphasize that every model is a simplification. And every model is therefore limited in what it can accomplish. There is no single comprehensive model that explains everything. Instead, economics is like a Swiss Army knife, a collection of tools useful for different purposes. Students at the intermediate level can start to fully appreciate the sense in which this is true. Guideline number 5, don't go overboard. Some years ago, one of my Harvard colleagues was asked to teach the mathematical track of the intermediate macroeconomics course. And he decided to use David Romer's textbook, Advanced Macroeconomics, which, as many of you know, is a textbook aimed at first-year PhD students. He reasoned that in addition to having Harvard students in his class, he had the Harvard students that were most comfortable with the use of mathematics, so he could move on to David's book. But I think he quickly realized his mistake. Romer's book is absolutely fantastic. I love David Romer's book. It's one of my favorite macroeconomics books of all time, but it's really too hard for sophomores, even mathematically gifted sophomores at elite schools. One of the biggest challenges when instructors face, and this is teaching at all different levels, is to avoid the tendency to overestimate students' knowledge and their ability to absorb new information. This is sometimes called the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it's hard to remember what it's like not to know it. It's easy to unwittingly overwhelm students. They have more trouble following notation, applying mathematics, and connecting concepts than many instructors appreciate. The same phenomenon is also observed, by the way, in seminars when economists present their research to others. After a research economist spends years working on a topic, they tend to overestimate how much an audience can absorb in 90 minutes. And they tend to sort of talk over the heads of even sophisticated audiences. Now, there's no simple remedy to solve the curse of knowledge. But let me offer a suggestion. Keep in mind a particular person as you speak. That person is someone you should know well. It could be a parent, a spouse, or your best friend, as long as that best friend is not an economist. Pretend you're explaining the material to them. Are they getting it? Are they lost? If you know that person well, you may more easily be able to empathize with their learning challenges. You might prevent yourself from going overboard. Guideline number 6, my last guideline. Remember the real world. Intermediate courses, both micro and macro, are largely about theory and model building. But it's crucial to keep in mind and keep reminding students that all this abstraction is aimed at a very important problem. How do we understand the real world in which we live? I try to incorporate as many empirical applications, case studies, and current events as possible when I teach intermediate macroeconomics. At this level, students are not going to relate to complex econometrics. You can't tell them that, we had a multi-equation model, we estimated it with generalized method of moments and tested the over-identifying restriction and they passed. That's not going to feel like a satisfying empirical application to them. So applications need to be straightforward and vivid. Scatter plots, I think, work well. I have a lot of scatter plots on my book, and I like presenting them. You can see how these two variables are related. So do dramatic historical narratives. Students are likely to remember what happened to real wages after the bubonic plague, which is a case study in my book, why historians view The Wizard of Oz an allegory for 19th century monetary policy, or why Henry Ford paid $5 a day to his workers when the going wage was about half that. Even better yet than dramatic historical narratives are events from today's news. It was a few months ago, maybe a couple of years ago now, when President Trump was complaining about the Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell and about how he was really unhappy with the monetary policy set by the central bank. That was a great example to use in the classroom when you want to talk about, say, central bank independence and why we believe in central bank independence and why it's important. Or to put it most bluntly, bad economic policies are bad for the nation, but they are great fodder for the economics classroom. And fortunately, we can count on a steady supply of these bad policies, and they're always great to talk about. Anyway, those are my 6 guidelines. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.